Hello, Anastasia. It's lovely to see you again.
It's nice to see you too. Look at us introducing ourselves in the beginning and not halfway or a quarter way through the podcast.
Yes. Hello, we are tennis fans.
We are tennis fans. And thank you to all 5 people or more, who knows, who listened to episode 1 of Ground Pass. That was, we have a name. We are Ground Pass.
We had a name pretty much as soon as we recorded, let's be honest. We are more organised than we give the impression for. Like, Anastasia runs a military operation here.
I have notes. Lots of notes. But yeah, it's been great. I sort of share the podcast with a bunch of friends, and they really did enjoy it. So that was good. And the feedback has been great so far. So we're just going to keep going and see if Coca-Cola calls us, or maybe Nike or something.
I'm making a face for podcast listeners, not realizing, of course, this is not going on video form. But yeah, sure, why not? Let's hope for it. But I've said this to you before, Anastasia. I would definitely keep recording this for 5 people who listen. If it's 5 people who like listening to us, who want to chat with us and want to learn about tennis. It's like, if you want to get into a sport, you want to have that friendly person next to you who's explaining it to you. And I'm happy to record myself being that friendly person.
In sort of, we're trying things out, seeing what the format's going to be like for this podcast. I think because we are targeting new fans of tennis, or maybe not so new, casual fans who just watch the occasional match here and there, we want to, at the beginning of every podcast, sort of have a tennis theme that we talk about. For this episode 2, we're going to talk about tennis tournaments.
Yes, so there's a few, so please bear with us. We mentioned it in the episode 1 that there are different types, and we thought, well, since we've talked about it quite a lot, let's dig into it and try and break it down for those who may be less familiar with the structure of the tennis tour. And yeah, let's see how that goes. So hopefully you can follow along. Most people listening will be familiar with the biggest tennis tournament in their country, which I would imagine, given these early stages, is going to be either the US or the UK. The UK, it would be Wimbledon, US Open in the US. Although, having said that, for some people, they probably only watch Wimbledon, even in the US.
This is true. And so you've jumped right in here to what the biggest sort of tournament is, and the biggest tournament that any sort of casual fan knows. If you've never watched tennis, or if you've heard of tennis, you've heard of a Grand Slam. And you might not have known that's what it was called, but it's a Grand Slam. And there are 4 of them. What are the 4 Grand Slams?
So there are 4 Grand Slams. There is the Australian Open, which is in Melbourne, and that's held. I can't remember what the Melbourne Park. Melbourne Park is the place, and that's in January, so during the Australian summer. Then there's Roland Garros, or otherwise known as the French Open, and that is held in Paris at Roland Garros. That's the name of the facility. And then you've got Wimbledon, which we've mentioned a couple of times already. That's in London. The official name for Wimbledon is the Championships. That's it. Maybe you'd call it the British Championships if you're out of the country, but the official tournament name is the Championships, technically, although it's marketed as Wimbledon, let's be honest. And then you've got finally the US Open, which is held in New York, in Flushing Meadows near Queens. Those are your 4 majors, and they are kind of 4 of the oldest surviving tennis tournaments. The reason why they're most important is they are historically the ones everyone's wanted to win for as long as tennis has been a competitive sport. You're going way back. I mean, I'm not going to dive too deep into the history side of things right now. We can do that another day, but my tennis brain's full of all the history. But yeah, you've got these 4, and basically there's 128 players in the draw. Winner has to win 7 matches, which is more than any other tournament. So not only are they bigger in terms of prestige and history, but they're also literally bigger in terms of draw size, in terms of players taking part, the money that they can win, and the length of tournament. 2 full weeks of tennis. In fact, actually 2 of the events go on for 15 days. If you want to start with tennis, those are the easiest ins for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's the easiest way to describe it. for other fans. So if you're, an American football fan, it's like, it's the Super Bowl. If you're, a soccer fan, it's the World Cup. Tennis just happens to have 4 of them. It's the biggest.
Every year. Can you imagine what the NFL would be like if you had 4 Super Bowls a year?
I'm sure people would love it. Mostly because they watch the Super Bowl for the performances. So it's just a big concert with football in between, So they would take 4 concerts a year. But yeah, so the Grand Slams are the largest championships tournaments for tennis. But that's not it. Obviously, most tennis athletes are aiming for the Grand Slam. That's the big kahuna. That's what they want to watch. Not watch. That's what they want to play. That's where they want to be.
That's what they want to win.
That's the one they want to win. It's also the hardest to win. But throughout the year, in between the Grand Slams, because there are 4 Grand Slams spread across the year, there are other tournaments that are run by the tours. And I think something to point out here, because it might be confusing for some people when they do compare slams to other tournaments, is the Grand Slams are not run by the tennis tours.
No, they're not. And again, that's due to a lot of history of how the sport became professional. Without going too much into detail, there was a lot of resistance to tennis players turning professional up until about over 50 years ago, like 68 was when professionals were allowed to play in the Grand Slams, or majors as they're otherwise known, a bit like in golf. So what happened was these kind of separate organizations, organized professional tours, kind of arose in amidst all the crazy tennis politics of trying to run the sport in the late 60s, early 70s, which meant that the Grand Slams they kind of run themselves, but they also work with the ITF, the International Tennis Federation. But the tours organize all the other professional events, or almost all the other professional events. And those are, as we explained last time, the ATP and the WTA. The ATP do the men's tour, the WTA do the women's tour. The way they do it is they have tournaments pretty much throughout the year, first week of January in the new year, right up until October, November time. And then there's a few weeks off during the winter months in the Northern Hemisphere. But the tournaments kind of structure, give the tournaments, the tours give different tournaments different levels of worth in terms of money and in terms of ranking points, which we'll explain another time. But all you need to know is that they're tournaments throughout the year, but they are staggered differently and have different levels of prestige or worth depending on it, but still not as worth as much as winning a major or a Grand Slam.
Right. And the easiest way to sort of show the differences in worth and how big they are literally by their names. So in the other tournaments are named according to how many ranking points you can win by winning the tournament. And we've got the Masters 1000, we've got 500s, and we've got 250s. Those are sort of the major groups, the 3 major groups in which tournaments throughout the year are filtered through. So you have, I think right now there are 9 Masters 1000s, and then it just increases from there. So you have a whole bunch of 500 level tournaments, and you also have a whole bunch of 250 level tournaments as well.
Although as of 2024, the women's tour is going to go up to 10 Masters 1000 tournaments. Yeah, pretty much as it is, as we said. So essentially you're looking at kind of throughout the year, kind of the biggest prizes, guaranteeing to have the biggest players, the highest ranked players are going to be at these 1000s as well as at the Grand Slams. So you're talking about 13, 14 tournaments where those names are going to show up, because the 1000 events are also pretty big. They're like, can be 56 or even 96 player draws.
Yeah. And it's kind of, isn't that, I think we are right now, we're in an inflection point a little bit. Like, just like Nick was saying, next year, the WTA is going to have an extra Masters 1000. And that's because the tours, they run these events and they want them to be almost as big and prestigious as the Grand Slams, which they do not run. So something that you can expect to see that started this year and is going to continue on into 2024, 2025 is these Masters 1000s are going to become, the easiest way for me to describe it, are mini slams. They usually a tournament goes on for a week. That's the general length of a tournament. But now the Masters 1000s are going to be 2-week events, just like Grand Slams.
Yeah, or not. Yeah, and they'll all phase through into that like 2-week long events. We can talk about. I don't want to get too deep into sort of the politics behind it or opinions on it because then we get really into deep tennis fan chat. It's not universally popular. I will say that there is an element of wanting tennis to be on the map outside of just 4 times a year. And so it's like, oh, hey, I want to watch Coco Gauff play again. I want to watch Novak Djokovic or Carlos Alcaraz play again. Then you're going to go, well, where are they playing? And you're more likely to find those bigger tournaments. You're kind of like, okay, I'm pretty much guaranteed to watch that. Watch it. Like someone I know is going to definitely be there, and they can market it a lot easier. That's kind of the logic for it. But obviously, I think the old system was a lot with cramming a 1,000 into a week. Obviously, there was a lot of tennis, a lot of potential to miss tennis. So by spreading the tennis out, it's kind of, you've got more of a chance of catching someone maybe. But yeah, and also there's an element of competition as well. Like the tours don't necessarily tennis politics is very much a power struggle between lots of different people. And the tours are probably trying to find ways to get themselves on the map as much as the slams.
Exactly, yeah. So there are 2 other groups that I want to talk about before we move on to sort of the tennis and what's been happening this week. And I do think they're important in their own right and almost could be a window into the future of the tours. The first one I would like to talk about are just challengers. They're known as challengers in the ATP level, and in the WTA level, they're known as
125K.
125K. Yes, 125K. But then they also have 70Ks, and they have lesser tournaments. So these are basically 2 tournaments or levels of. They're 2 tournament levels for players who are below sort of, I think, the 200 level, you would say?
It varies a lot. So I would say typically in a sort of a challenger or 125K, you are looking at generally outside the top 100. Top 100 ranked players are generally the ones who are week in, week out on the main tour. Not always. Like, I'd say maybe like a few people in the lower end of the top 100 will probably enter challenger levels and try and like be a bigger name in that field. And I'm going to call it challengers because 125K is a bit of a mouthful, which is called that because that's the total prize pot available for the whole field. But yeah, typically top 100 for the high level challenges. Obviously, you drop further down, maybe outside the top 200. But there is actually a level below challenger in 125K, which is run by the ITF. They're called futures, and there's different levels in that. And actually, the challenger tour is probably for the men is probably where the big breakouts come through. They don't have as many futures events. They're much more. They're not worth as much, whereas for the women, it's very much all futures events all the way up until 125K, which is like an elite group that sort of is a stepping stone between them and the main tour. Yeah, I don't want to get too deep into the tennis iceberg on this.
No. But I wanted to bring it up because it's where players who are outside of the top 100 can kind of build up ranking points, which we will talk about in a future episode, to get into the top 100 and grow further. So, or, I think for a lot of fans who maybe saw Andy Murray playing a bunch of challengers this year, it's where maybe a player who's on the mend or coming back from injury or, mostly coming back from injury or some sort of time off, maybe in order to get some ranking points, they'll go play challengers because it might be an easier win for them. I know Dominic Thiem right now, who's coming back from injury, is playing a lot of challengers in order to do that. So it's a tool that some, high-level players can use to bump up their ranking a bit.
But as you say before, it's also where the future of tennis is forged. Most up-and-coming players every up-and-coming player has to make their way through that tour unless they do an Emma Raducanu and wins the US Open on their first attempt.
Not everyone can be Emma.
No, not everyone can be Emma. We will both say that. But obviously that's also the place if you want to watch the younger generation, the next gen, who might be good there, because the reality is maybe with Challenger tennis, if you watch it, it's not going to be the highest quality. I will say that you're not going to be watching the very, very, very best in the world, the tip of the mountain, the 1% taking part, but you are going to be watching competitive matches. Everyone on that tour is very evenly matched. And it's also more likely to be a local tournament for you that you could check out. And the tickets will not be that expensive.
That's true. Exactly. It might be a good entryway.
Yeah, always check it out. Like there's a couple of tournaments like locally to me that I've gone, I could go to that. I've not actually got round to it yet, but it's not everything in the UK is based around London, so it's nice to know that I could probably go to somewhere like a challenger event going on in a small British town somewhere that you don't realise. But yeah, so definitely check them out. If you have a look, local tennis tournaments, you might be surprised.
Great way to see some live tennis if you have some around you, for sure. And then the last section, or the last group of events that I would love to talk about, because I think it does sort of give an insight of where tennis hopefully might be going, are group events. I think the most popular group event or team event that most people might know is Davis Cup, because Davis Cup has been around forever, and it's where tennis players get to do something that they don't really get to do other than the Olympics maybe, which is play for their country. But also a big part of it is playing on a team, which tennis, as most people know, if you're not playing doubles, is a very individual sport. So playing in a group event and a team event is not something that tennis players usually get to do. So Davis Cup has been an event where you have a group of players all playing for their country that has sort of, it gives the tennis fans something different. A little bit, the energy at Davis Cup is a little different. And on the women's side, they have what is the Billie Jean King Cup, which is basically the female version of Davis Cup. So these are a couple of group events that have existed for a long time. And now there are a couple of new events that have been added to the group calendar, very new. I think the United Cup is only going to be in its second run, right?
Yeah, so United Cup is actually in the first week of January. It starts then, it's kind of marketing itself as the opening to the tennis calendar in many ways. And it is, unlike the other two events we've talked about, worth ranking points, but it's also a united male-female team. So you've got each country will have a men's player, women's player, and they'll play doubles as well. No, right, that's Hopman Cup. Anyway, but there's I think they've just changed the rules on United Cup, so I'm struggling to follow it.
Yes, they did.
So United Cup is basically that, and it is taking the place of the Hopman Cup, which was run at a similar point during the year, but wasn't necessarily supported by the tours, whereas the United Cup is being run as a combined effort by the tours. The Hopman Cup has been resurrected, and it's kind of been put in the middle of the year and everyone forgets about it. But it's the same principle. It's both men and women competing together for their country. But yeah, that's kind of the key difference. And obviously it's called the United Cup because it's got both. And it ended up probably getting created because there was obviously, they saw a demand for it, like the men and the women playing on the same teams. It's going to draw all fans in, but also it was probably, again, tennis politics, a way for the tours to kind of get in, because for the Davis Cup and the Billie Jean King Cup, they're having to fight for space on the tennis calendar in amidst all the tours where everyone can actually get on and earn some points and money, whereas they don't do that playing for their country in other events. Olympics is a different story. They know the tennis players want to play at the Olympics. They're going to make space for that. But that's kind of where we are with it. There's a lot of events where players have the opportunity to play for their country. That could be an episode in itself, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. No, totally. The group events for sure, and how they evolve and what it means for a possible merger between the ATP and WTA. We could just write a book on that, probably.
Yes, I mean...
but we're not going to.
No, if we were going to write a book, we'd be doing that, but it's much more fun to do a podcast.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But so that's pretty much the breakdown of tennis tournaments throughout the year. I know the first entry for most people are the Grand Slams, and should be, but there's just so much tennis and so many opportunities to watch tennis and keep up with the tour, and not just pop in 4 times a year, because I think by following the tour and all the other tournaments, it kind of informs what comes up in the slams, you know? So if a player does badly in a slam, it usually is informed by how they were playing in the weeks before, which if you're just jumping in the 4 times a year, you're missing, I think, some important storytelling. Or, you know, even with someone like Marketa Vondrousova, who was a new Wimbledon champion, part of her story was told during the rest of the season where she was injured and she was coming back. And so her story is even a little bit more bigger and fun than just like, oh, you just turn up at Wimbledon and she's a new winner. There's a whole behind the scenes as well that I think almost makes the slam so much more interesting, knowing the backstories.
Yeah, and we know everyone wants to know the backstories, right? Like, there's so many people who want to know. Like, you go to if you are a newer fan, or you only know certain names because you've only watched the US Open or Wimbledon, or maybe you'll watch the 4 slams. The reality is that you're not always going to know who everyone is. You might get lucky and watch an early round match between 2 players who, like, say, an Andy Murray versus Stan Wawrinka in round 1, because that could happen. But you could also get something like Matteo Berrettini versus Diego Schwartzman, and suddenly you're like, well, who are these guys? Now, as hardcore tennis fans, we know who they are. Like, they're big names to us.
Yeah.
But, you know, that you get the sort of the sense of the stories and the journeys they've been going on day in, day out throughout the year. And so much of tennis is about the results and what they do. Now, people do follow people for their personality. We've talked a little bit about that on the podcast before. Like, I'm not a fan of Daniel Medvedev's tennis style, but I love his personality. So that's so that can happen again. But then you get to know their personalities through watching them play and like see what they're like on court or in interviews afterwards. So again, maybe how you follow tennis week in, week out, that's a show topic we should probably do, which is probably going to be difficult to do for an international audience. But yeah, if you want to go, but even like, hey, I just finished watching the US Open. I want to watch more tennis. Like, what's next? Where's next?
What's next?
Like,
yeah.
Go find the tours.
Definitely. Okay, so moving on. It has been quite a 2 weeks since we last recorded on the tours. A lot has happened. One thing I want to mention, because we're not really going to talk about it a lot, but I remember my player of the fortnight last time we recorded was Jannik Sinner, and yes, he did. Yes, he did win Beijing.
Yep, he did.
He added a 500 to his stack. Yeah. Now he has one of each, except for a Grand Slam. That's next.
I'm a Jannik Sinner believer. I think there's so many people who go, oh, but he's not like, I'm a Jannik Sinner believer. I think there's a slam coming.
Me too. It's going to take time. And I think that's it's easy to forget sometimes. They're so young. I think Jannik Sinner is 22. I think there's so much more years of tennis left for him to play and chances for him to win a Grand Slam. But yes, he was my player of the fortnight last episode, and he did win the title in Beijing, which will bring us to what happened this week, these past 2 weeks on the ATP Tour, which was a Masters 1000 in Shanghai. It was Master 1000, so it's right below a Grand Slam, big event. And the storylines in this tournament were so good. I think for the casual watcher of tennis, all the big names were kicked out early. You know, Medvedev was out the door early. Carlos did make it to the quarterfinals, but he was also out. Sinner, who was coming in from winning Beijing, also went out early. So I think maybe for the casual fan, they're like, oh, who do I watch and what are the big names? Everyone's gone. But for me, it was such a great event for the up-and-comers and also people who have proved themselves throughout the season, playing well and finally making that breakthrough. Case in point, Hubie Urkacz. He finally did it. He was the champion in Shanghai, and he's had a great season, don't you think?
Yeah, he has. I think he's had an underrated season, to be honest. I mean, I'd say that about the great thing about all of the people who were taking part, who did well in Shanghai, was they'd all had really solid seasons, actually.
Yeah.
They got deep runs in different tournaments. Hurkacz he'd got himself to the Cincinnati semi-finals. He had a couple of really good matches with Alcaraz this year. Definitely at least one. I'm sure there was another one.
Yeah, I think they saw each other in Cincinnati and in Toronto.
Yeah, and they were both good. They were both good matches. He challenged Alcaraz, and Hurkacz may be more well known for being the last person Roger Federer played in singles, a little bit. But he's a very, very he's one of the nice guys of tennis, I would say. Like, nobody has a bad thing to say about Hurkacz as a person. There might be some tennis fans who might criticize some technicalities in his game. I think everyone was just very happy to see such a nice guy come good. I mean, you say finally, this is his second 1,000 title of his career.
It is. It is his second 1,000. I think the last...
Miami 2021.
Yes. He won Miami 2021. So yes, his is his second one. But I say finally mostly for his performance from this year. I think he's been on the cusp so often. He's been semifinals. He had that match against Novak Djokovic at Wimbledon. So he's always just kind of been there a little bit and not really being able to break that ceiling and actually win an event. And I think Shanghai was the event for him. He, unfortunately, and this is tennis, someone's got to win. The other finalist at Shanghai was Andrei Rublev, who had his own major breakthrough earlier this season when he won his first 1,000 in Monaco, and which is another Masters event, but he's always I call him, he's the prince. He's never the king. He's always the prince. He has this sort of record of never winning, never getting out of quarterfinals into semis and at Grand Slams. And, he's also a very nice guy on tour person. He does tend to be a little bit volatile on court, mostly towards himself, which can be jarring for people to watch. And this match was tough as well for him. Like, I think you could tell he definitely really wanted it, but couldn't go through. But again, someone who's had, a great season and got into a second Masters 1000 final this year.
Rublev has this reputation, probably more than any other player, of being very good but missing that extra step to being like the king of the mountain. He's got a great game. He's got some big wins in his career, but he's like, more often than not, he will run out of steam against the bigger guys because he'll beat everyone else. But he if he runs into someone like the current sort of big four on the ATP. He usually comes up short unless he pulls off something really special. He was probably fortunate to lose in Shanghai. It was if you want to see a real roller coaster tennis match, that final was it. Rublev could have won that match. He was this close. I realize I'm not on camera, but he was 1 point away from winning it. He could have, one more point would have done it. And really, Hurkacz handled the situation so well. So it was tough, whoever was going to lose it. They both deserved it.
I think some other performances, just to mention before we move on to the WTA, we had sort of an all-American quarterfinals in the Korda and Shelton match. Korda, who is coming back from an injury he sustained at the beginning of the year during the Australian Open, and he's finally back on tour. He's had some great wins here and there. He really, did well in Shanghai, was looking really, really good, and came up against a Ben Shelton who has turned his record around outside of the slams. So Ben Shelton's someone who came on the scene this year. It's his first year as a professional. If you haven't heard of the hanging up celebration, are you living under a rock?
It's all over TikTok.
I'm sure you've heard about it. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. In slams, he has had some epic performances. He got to the quarterfinals in at the Australian Open. He got to, which was his first time out of the country. He's American, and he also got to the quarterfinals of the semis of the U.S. Open, and lost to some guy named Novak Djokovic. So there was that. But outside of the Grand Slams, he hasn't been able to string together wins. You know, he'll win one and then lose the other. And Shanghai was the first time where I think he finally took that energy from a Grand Slam and brought it into the rest of the tour. And he was doing some phenomenal... I mean, first of all, he's a serve... I don't know, I think serve bot is not really a great term.
Do we want to explain what a serve bot is to our newer listeners?
What is a serve bot, Nick?
Okay, I'm going to explain it. Brilliant. So a serve bot is typically more seen on the men's tour, but they do exist on the women's tour, where it's a nickname given by fans to a player whose biggest strength is their serve. That is the first shot they play it's their turn to feed the ball into to start the point. Typically, it's an overarm motion, and some of them can hit the ball so hard. I'm thinking on the men's side that it can travel at well over 120, 130 miles an hour. Ben Shelton was saying records at the US Open for how fast he was able to hit serve and how hard the ball was traveling. I think he was in the 140s miles per hour.
Yeah.
Almost hitting 150.
I think his record 138 was the official record, I think, at the US Open.
And then he smashed it twice.
Look that up and I'll
yeah.
And he did it twice. I always wonder what is happening with their shoulders in that moment.
I don't know. It's clearly made of steel. But the problem is obviously serve bots in the most extreme sense are their biggest weapon is their serve, but the rest of their game lacks in comparison. So some people who I know would say John Isner is the biggest example. Americans may have heard of him. He was America's top ranked player for a few years. 6'10". He had a huge serve, and generally it was pretty much difficult for pretty much anyone to get it back. But his movement wasn't as impressive, and the rest of his shots, whilst could beat pretty much anyone else who ever tried, like an amateur like you and me, easily, against the very, very best players in the world, again, was lacking. So that's what a serve bot is. It's someone who relies on their serve to get them points.
Correct. And that's why I always say it might not be the exact term to use for Shelton, where, yes, he does have an awesome serve. Right now, arguably one of the best on tour, but he also has a game to go along with it. So it was really great to see him play, and to see two Americans play because I think it hadn't happened for a very long time to have two Americans in a quarterfinals at a Masters event, which is one of the bigger events. You just don't see that anymore. And I think it was a testament to where the American game is right now, where, definitely had a dip, but is on the way up with a lot of great players on both the ATP and the WTA. So that was a match I just wanted to bring up. And also just to bring up Baby Fed. If you don't know who Baby Fed is, that's Grigor Dimitrov, who also had a great tournament in Shanghai. He got to the semifinals. He lost to Rublev. They're best friends. If you go to our Instagram, I posted a video of them hugging at the net, and they're just the cutest, friendship. It must be tough to play a good friend and someone you have to beat on court, but they definitely had a good hug out at the net, even though Rublev won that match. But yeah, Grigor's been playing another player this year who kind of turned things around. If you know Grigor, who has been around for a while, he has a one-handed backhand. Everyone called him Baby Fed. He was repped by Nike. And this year, he switched everything around. He switched sponsors. He's now repped by Lacoste. And he has a new coaching team. So I think he's definitely, he's not, for tennis players, I think Grigor's 32. So a lot of people think, he's over the hill. But I think he still has a lot of good tennis in him, and he's trying to prove that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Dimitrov he's been his career high of world number 3. There's definitely a lot of talent in there. In Dimitrov, that's why he was known as Baby Fed, as well as the one-handed backhand. He could pull off. He's able to pull off some really spectacular shots, and I think most of his year has been doing really, really well until he comes across one of the top players. There's a bit of a theme here with this tournament, right? When the top players go out early or they don't show up, there's a party, and everyone's fighting to be the most popular guy in the room. I think Dimitrov was one of them. Actually, it was a win-win-win situation from the Shanghai semi-finals. You had 3 out of 4 with a reputation of being nice guys. I'm not saying Korda isn't, but he doesn't have that rep yet, is what I mean. Dimitrov, he's got a couple more years of good tennis in him at least. So I'm interested to see where it goes. I want to see him do well. I thought he might win the tournament, but I think he ran out of steam against Rublev.
As they were saying, Dimi was looking good. He really looked like he could go all the way. And based on his head-to-head with Rublev, I really thought he would, but Rublev was playing out of his mind, or as he told Manarino, which if I can find this video, I will also post it in our show notes so you can take a look at it. But at the handshake after he had beaten Manarino, and I think he bageled him in the final set, he went up to the net, he apologized. He was like, "I'm so sorry, I'm playing the best ever," which I thought was hilarious. Rublev can be funny. He can be really funny sometimes.
He's not, it's one of the reasons why we love him.
Yes, this is true. That was Shanghai for the ATP. And then over the past 2 weeks, the WTA have been in a few tournaments around Asia with a lot of interesting results.
Yeah, so we'll give you the headlines for the WTA. So they also had a Masters 1000 event in Beijing that finished the week before Shanghai final. So the winner was Iga Swiatek, who you may hear her name a lot on this podcast. Not just because she's a former world number 1, she's currently second best, ranked number 2 in the world. She's going to be competing for slams for a few years. She also happens to be my favourite player right now. So there will be a lot of mentions of Iga Swiatek. I can't help it. I've just had to apologise and give a warning before everything I ever record. But yes, Iga Swiatek won that tournament. I don't think it's worth us going too deep into that because Anastasia and I were on another show where we did talk about it. So if you want to check it out, go check out that video podcast. You can find it on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and things like that. So I'll just say
leave a link as well.
Yeah, Iga Swiatek won the tournament. That's the headline. Go watch that if you want our in-depth thoughts, if you want to brave us going to full fan mode.
Yeah, no, that was definitely a good win for her. I felt like she was in God mode, as they say, where after maybe not the best performances for her throughout the U.S. swing, I think she really was coming into Beijing with a point to prove. Not really to... I don't, it's Iga. She's won 4 Grand Slams. I don't think she has a point to prove, but there was a level of can she still do it out in the ether, and I think she just wanted to kind of shut that down a bit and really did play. I think when Iga is in that mind, or when you see her in that sort of focused mind space, you can't. It's tough. You gotta be playing the best of your life ever.
And even then, you may not win.
And even then, you may not. And then even then, you may not. She's so good. When she's on, she's so good. But yeah, so that was Beijing, and there was a 500 in Zhengzhou. I think that's how you say it. I'm really sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. And then there were 2 250s, one in Hong Kong and one in Seoul. So there was a lot going on the WTA side. A quick mention for Seoul, because I did not watch a second of tennis that was happening in Seoul, but the winner was Jess Pegula. I'm going to leave a link to her Instagram post that she posted after she won this event. Jess Pegula is an American player who's also half Korean, and this was a very important tournament to her, so she actually wanted to play it. I think a lot of people might have thought, why is Jess Pegula playing a 250 in Korea when she could be preparing for the WTA finals, which are coming soon? And it really was sweet and touching. So I will put a link in our show notes so that you can take a look at that and read it. And I don't think it's not always about the tennis, sometimes there are bigger reasons out there in the world. So I will do that. And then just want to touch on the 250 in Hong Kong, because the winner is someone I think a lot of people might know. She was the other finalist to the US Open 2021, paired with Emma Raducanu, and that is Leylah Annie Fernandez.
Whoop, whoop.
Won a tournament in Hong Kong. It's her first tournament in so many days. I saw this on Twitter. I think it was like 500
600 days, I think.
She basically hasn't won a title since March of 2022.
2022, yeah.
I think Leylah burst onto the scenes during that US Open. She had a phenomenal run. I still argue that her run to the finals was more impressive than Emma's, because of the people she beat to get there. And along with Emma, she kind of burst onto the scenes. I think her ranking shot up, and I think she was in the top 20 right away. And it kind of wasn't sustained. She had a very big dip in the rankings and hasn't had the best couple of years on tour. But with this win, it kind of brings her back. First of all, it brings her back into the top 50. And I think it brings back those sort of like winning vibes. She's been doing great in doubles. She has a really great doubles partner in Taylor Townsend.
Great win. I think Fernandez is maybe one of those players who turns it on a couple of weeks a year. And then when she does, it's awesome to watch. And she has been a little bit unfortunate with some of the draws she's got as well. But when she's on her tennis's box office, she's had some unbelievable battles with Caroline Garcia throughout the year, where they've like really gone toe to toe. And very similar in this run, she had a couple of real battles, one against Mira Andreeva early on in the second round, and then the final against Siniakova. That was a real battle between those two. Like Siniakova won the first set, went up in the match, and then Fernandez comes back, looks in control of the second set. Siniakova then comes back. Fernandez wins a marathon game that helps her get the second set, and then the third was just back and forth all the way. And then Fernandez was the one who got the crucial last moment. I have to say, actually, all three finals and all the tournaments that happened this week in Jiangsu and Hong Kong and Seoul were all really good tennis on display there. I will say that, like, really, really good matches to watch.
Especially at the smaller tournaments. Sometimes you don't really get great matches, but it really was blockbuster this weekend.
Yeah. And Fernandez looks awesome when she's on. She's whipping up the crowd. I love her game, how she just so digs in and grits it out and kind of counters everything her opponent throws at her. Works all the angles. It's just gorgeous to watch. I've mentioned Iga Swiatek as my favourite player, but Leylah Fernandez is a very, very close second. And I'm very happy that she's won a title. She's back in the top 50. And now I'm kind of hoping she's going to get herself a seeding for Australia, which might be a bit of an effort, but you never know. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at. So I think we both really enjoyed that run from Leylah.
Yeah, totally. And I love her brand of tennis. She does these like little fist pumps, like literally after every point she'll do a little fist bump, and there's just something about her that brings you in. And I think like a lot of players that we might have mentioned that are emotional like that can sort of bring you into the match that they're having, and you kind of feel all the emotions along with them. She's definitely one of those. She also happened to play in this same tournament earlier on, Mira Andreeva, who we talked about during the last episode, and she beat her. I mean, Mira Andreeva won the first set. She came out of the gates just hot, and the first set was over before you knew it, and she won it. But Leylah was able to sort of fight back and not, I think as they say, not play the player, but play the ball, and was able to win that one. Love Mira. Can't wait to see more of her, but I'm really happy Leylah was able to win. The last tournament that happened was Zhengzhou, which is
the 500.
Yes, which was the 500, and was won by Qin Wen, who is a Chinese player. And there was something so fun about a Chinese player winning a 500 level tournament in China. I think it was really, really great for the fans there. Also, Qin Wen is a bit of a star, isn't she?
Yeah, I mean, look, she's got a big game. She's got a big personality, and it's been on show. She's had an incredible few weeks. She won gold medal in tennis at the Asian Games about a few weeks back, and she's really let that momentum carry her on. And she played so well in that final to beat Barbora Krejcikova, who is a Grand Slam champion. And that's all you need to know at this point. But like that's a high standard to beat.
Yeah.
And yeah, Zheng is definitely coming on leaps and bounds, and she's still only 21. So I think she's setting herself up for a very exciting season in 2024 potentially. But yeah, with if she could pull off this kind of run, then she's going to be a contender, which is probably what Chinese tennis has been looking for a while. They had Li Na about 10 years ago before she retired, and they have been looking for their biggest star, especially given how much of the tour takes place over there.
Yeah. She's such a great player. I think one thing I really noticed, she has I'm obsessed with service motions. The more awkward, the better. And she definitely had a funny service motion, super high ball toss, super high ball toss.
You would not be able to take your eyes off a Rybakina versus Zheng match.
Probably not. But yeah, so I'm excited to see where she goes. I really hope she can sort of carry this momentum on and have a really great 2024. So that was, and I can't not mention the karaoke. Have you seen the karaoke video yet from the trophy ceremony?
Yes, I am aware of it. I haven't watched it, but I have seen it on my feed.
Well, I will send you a link, and I will also put that same link in the show notes so everyone can watch that and enjoy it like I did. And that was the last 2 weeks of tennis. What is coming up next? Because tennis never stops.
Well, kind of, sort of. We're actually getting to the point where it's about to stop, actually.
True.
At least go on pause for Christmas. Yeah, we've got a few. I mean, at the minute, we're kind of in the winding down phase. The men's tour is moving to Europe to play indoors over there, although there is a 500 taking place in Tokyo.
That's the last Asian event.
We're doing tours all over the world because we've got a tournament going on in China, we've got a tournament going on in Romania, and a tournament going on in Tunisia. So we've got 3 continents in a week, which is madness. But reality is that we are building up for the season-ending events, which actually we did not talk about in our breakdown of different types of events.
We didn't.
Because there is another one that we didn't mention, which is the finals.
Yes.
Which both the ATP and the WTA run. And essentially it's this. The top 8 ranked players in singles and doubles compete against each other in 2 round-robin groups. So each player plays 3 times. Best performing players, they make it to semi-finals. The winners of the semi-finals get to the final. We can explain exactly how it works nearer the time, but we are now in the kind of qualifying period on the men's tour. The women's side we already know about. So when we record our next episode, we will be building up for the WTA finals.
Yeah.
And we'll go through what's going on there.
And another tournament that we didn't mention it's very different. There really isn't an equivalent yet, I think, on the women's side. And that will be the next gen end of year tournament for the men's, which is basically the top ranked players, 21 years old and under, play that.
Yeah.
And it's sort of it's next gen, which I'm sure is a phrase you might have heard before. It's the next generation of future top ATP players, or at least that's how it's marketed. And, Sinner has been a next-gen winner. Alcaraz has been a next-gen winner. Who I think Tsitsipas has been one. Has Rune won next-gen? Or did he just play?
No, he never did. The other winners were Chung Yun, who got injured straight away. Yeah. And then last year was Brandon Nakashima, who was probably the first one to really not quite impress after it. He's still got time, but he's the first one to not really do something super impressive straight away.
Yeah, totally. So that's another sort of end of year event that happens that actually goes into December. So for the men's side, they have the ATP finals in Turin in Italy. And this year, and right after that, then they have the next gen, which will be in Saudi Arabia this year in Jeddah.
Yeah. So that's what we've got to look forward to coming up. Obviously, that was a lot of information all in one go. not necessarily going to break down super what's going on, but if you're in the right time zone, definitely tune in to watch all of that. Obviously, men's indoor tennis is sort of super quick, lots of power involved. Like the power hitters are going to come into form. The women's tour, you've got a lot of different stories going on at the same time, and then but yeah, it's all going to be. We're all building up for the big season finale.
Yeah.
Coming up
very,
very soon.
And for, on the ATP side, definitely what to be watching for this week is the players fighting to qualify for the finals. We have these 3 tournaments happening, 2 in Europe, 1 in Asia. Only the top 4 have been picked so far who have qualified into the end of year tour. So you have about 4 or 5 players who are fighting right now. One of them being Zverev, who unfortunately possibly more because it just keeps moving. Zverev, who was someone looking to get to the end of year finals, was just upset in Tokyo in the first round, so he's out. So yeah,
there's some big points on the table as well because we'll get into ranking points probably next week, but obviously you're aware of the 500 points available for a title that's available in Tokyo, and then we've got 2 500s the following week, one in Basel in Switzerland and one in Vienna, Austria. So there's going to be at least a couple of guys who can get themselves a nice boost ready to go into the final phase for qualifying, which would be an event in Paris-Bercy, which we'll probably talk a little bit more about next episode.
Thank you.